Okay. Kia ora, everyone. Thank you for having us. David and I have been composting, cold composting, worm farming, community gardening, organic gardening for about 30 years now. And we currently run an organics diversion project in North Auckland called the City to Farm Project. And tonight, I'm really excited to tell you about what we've been working on for the past 4 years. Just about the opposite from the hot rot system. So we're more about soil building than making compost to sell. In fact, if we could skip composting entirely and go straight to soil building, we would do that. Now, we're not against hot composting. It's great, especially if you've got really large volumes of materials, a lot of putrescible materials, or you're dealing with noxious weeds and seeds. But we're not doing either. And so we don't really need to do hot composting. Instead, we're focusing on trying to turn non-productive soil into productive soil. Well, we have this theory that if we could turn our terrible clay soils into terra preta, like they do in the Amazon, we would have all these advantages. And what's incredible, who here, can I see a show of hands about terra preta? Who's familiar with terra preta? Okay, a few people. So terra preta is a soil made by the pre-Columbian people in the Amazon out of some of the worst clay in the world. The tropical soils in the Amazon are heavily leached and really heavily mined by the soil microbiome. But yet they find these patches of black earth, and terra preta means black earth, where they can crop continuously with no loss in soil fertility. How does that work? So there's a lot of research going on. In fact, terra preta and biochar, one of its main ingredients, are one of the most highly researched topics in universities across the world right now. So we all probably have had experience with clay, and clay is soil texture. Texture is the percentage of sand, silt, and clay in the soil. However, soil structure can change, and that's what we want to do. We want to change the structure of clay soil into something that's more like chocolate cake. And you've probably all seen a nice lump of clay that you can mold and shape and like pottery. But when you have good soil structure, it breathes, it's porous, it has crumbs. And that's one of the incredible characteristics of good agricultural soil in terra preta. But how do you make that? Well, it starts with creating airspace, pore space. And in this, you see here's a mix of sand, silt, and clay. The little tiny dots are the clay, the big bits are the sand. And if you add compost and biochar, and the orange is the compost and the black's the biochar, what will happen over time with wetting and drying is these little micro aggregates will form where the sands and silts will clump up against the clays, and you'll get the crumb structure. And if that keeps happening, and if you get more and more soil plants on top pumping down starches and sugars, and you have the microbiome working, and you have fungal hyphae starting to penetrate these little clumps, they'll clump it up even bigger. And then you move from micropores into macropores, and then you really start getting soil structure. Now, the thing about biochar is that it seems to support a highly diverse soil microbiome by providing a vast honeycomb of tiny spaces and surface area that microorganisms populate, like rooms in a condominium. But since the biochar does not decompose, the microorganisms aren't leached away. And unlike compost, it stays in the soil permanently, providing the permanent homes and also providing that stickability, that aggregate soil structuring quality long after the compost decomposes. Now, if you've got a healthy plant community growing on top, constantly pumping down starches and sugars, you'll be able to maintain that soil structure. But biochar is a great aid in that, particularly when you're starting off, when you're first trying to, break that clay. And biochar has another interesting property. It has a negative electrical charge, so cations like potassium and magnesium and calcium will cling to it. And these are some of the reasons they think between the soil by a very diverse soil microbiome and its electrical charge, it has a lot more fertility and keeps the soil fertile over time. And our experience is that is exactly what's happening. So here on the left is the soil, the clay soil next to our composting area. And I could spend a lot of time talking about this, but generally before, it was low in fertility. It was very heavy and dense. It had low organic matter, a low cation exchange, a low base saturation. And it has transformed quite a bit. The pH has gone way up. The CEC has gone from, I think, 8 to 36. The base saturation's gone from 69 to 96. It's become lighter, more friable, and the water infiltration has increased 25 to 30 times. Now, this is light, as Paul puts it, it's like light speed in terms of soil formation, very rapid. So how do you make terra preta? That's our big question. How do you do it? So we have tried to do what the Amazonians, what the archaeologists and anthropologists tell us. They say that the Amazonians took their waste products, they took fecal matter, plant remains, bones, shells, pottery, just about any sort of organic waste they could find, mixed it with the biochar, and either piled it on top or dug it in. And here's an interesting looking shovel. So we think maybe they trenched it in. And the other thing that we did is that we pre-compost the biochar. Now the Amazonians knew that you can't just put biochar straight onto the soil because it will rob your soil of minerals and also of microorganisms, and your plants will look really sick for 3 or 4 years. But if you soak the biochar in something that's rich in microorganisms and minerals, that won't happen. And we have found that this combination of bokashi inoculant, food scraps, biochar, woody mulch has a synergistic relationship. The bokashi provides microorganisms to charge the biochar and ferment the food scraps for rapid breakdown when exposed to air. The woody mulch in the bottom balances the carbon to nitrogen ratio and keeps the food scraps out of the bokashi digestate. The biochar neutralizes the acidic pH of the bokashi digestate, controls odors, and becomes charged and inoculated with microorganisms from the food scraps. And the food scraps provide, at least temporarily, a really broad range of starches and sugars for the microorganisms to feed on, so that you get a quite diverse soil microbiome right away. So at the farm, and we're basically doing on-farm composting, there's 4 different methods that we have been experimenting with. We've been doing swale composting, which is basically digging a shallow swale parallel to the contours. And Phil and Jenny will tell you about that. and then piling up what's dug out downhill, and then growing bananas. That's swale composting, and it has biochar in the bottom. The spice piles, which are static pile inoculated compost, is basically layered up food scraps and woody mulch, but sealed inside black polyethylene. And what's interesting about this is because the bokashi is a facultative microbiome, it has microorganisms that can live aerobically and anaerobically. It's all sealed up, but it still works. I couldn't believe it when we opened it up, and it was beautiful stuff inside. We've done trench composting, where you just dig a trench, layer it up with the food scraps and the woody mulch. And we always use the same formula, which is 100 of woody mulch and 100 of food scraps with the biochar in it. It's the standard formula in any form, and it seems to work. And then there's the Johnson-Su method. So how much land area and infrastructure do you need? Well, we're doing this on farms. So the most important thing is a rural zone, and depending on what system you're using, you have different requirements to meet setbacks, odor discharge, and air discharge. So this is called an activity table, and it's really good to work with a planner on this. So in a rural zone, if you're doing enclosed systems like the spice pile or the trench or the bioreactor, it's a permitted activity. That's the level, the P. But in a rural zone where you're doing open composting, like swale composting, it's going to be a discretionary activity, which is a D. And then there's some other set requirements about distance from property lines and distance from neighbors and distance from streams. But there's a lot of land out there, and the bulk of North Rodney is in rural zone. So what is the process? So the box truck with the tail lift delivers bins already with biochar and mulch in the bottom to commercial kitchens. And in the commercial kitchens, the staff basically layer up their food scraps with the bokashi composting and stomp it down. So they do the layering in the kitchens. We collect the food scraps in the bins or buckets once a week and take it out to the farm. And there, the farm, in the farm, they cure for 2 or 3 weeks. And I don't know if you can tell by looking at this wheelie bin, but there's straps on it. And the straps and the seals seal it so that these are airtight systems. So how much does it cost? Well, we thought $30,000 was expensive, but after 3.8 million, we're not, we're a bit relieved. So we have about $30,000 in box trucks, wheelie bins, and buckets. We have about 13,000 in, I think it's IBCs, water blaster, generator, wash table, bin lifter, something that tips the bins into the tractor. We've got the composting equipment, which consists of a tractor and a fast feeder. And we have our labor, which we're currently donating. And then the rural property owners donate 1 day a month of their time in order to run their tractor and the fast feeder. So CapEx about 70,000 and OpEx about 1,200 a week. Now, we offset this by charging for collections, and hopefully we will be backfilling with bananas, taking bananas back to the cafes and restaurants. So that is what we're doing right now, which is about 60 tons a year. But if we wanted to increase to 240 tons a year, we would need to get a trailer so we could transport the fast feeder and the tractor and the bin washer and the bin tipper from farm to farm. We ran a series of workshops back in August and September last year and invited our local rural community, and there was a lot of interest, but nobody had a tractor with a fast feeder or a digger or a bin tipper. So if we could, if we could take the equipment to them, it's pretty easy to transport the food scraps, then we think we could get a lot more farms on board. And yesterday I discovered this thing. It's called a electric scaffolding lift platform. And if we had a bunch of those in the back of the truck, we could basically roll the wheelie bins on, lift them up to the ceiling, and they get more wheelie bins underneath. So we could basically double the capacity of our truck. And as soon as you start doubling the capacity of the truck, then your costs per unit of compost or food scraps goes way down. So why are we doing this? It has to do with our climate emergencies. So we know that soils and vegetation are the second largest carbon sink on the planet, and actually soils hold more carbon than all of the vegetation on the planet combined. Oops, let's go back one. But sequestering soil carbon is not simple. It relies on building an ecologically or biologically complete microbiome that can build this really stable kind of climax soil fungi community of a particular type that can produce something called glomalin. Who here has heard of glomalin? No? Okay. Yeah, Sarah has. So glomalin is an extremely stable form of soil carbon that does not break down quickly. And biochar is another really stable form of soil carbon that doesn't break down. And if you can grow the glomalin, you actually sequester a huge amount of carbon for a very long period of time. And we know that if we maintain a permanent soil cover and diversified crop rotations and minimum soil disturbance, stable soil carbon can grow very slowly. It's called conservation agriculture, and there's been research around the world that says if you do these three things at the same time, you will grow topsoil, you'll save your topsoil, you'll stop soil erosion. But the problem is it happens really, really slowly. So then the Rodale Institute has been working on how do you grow soil carbon. And they said, oh, look, it will grow faster if you take conservation agriculture, these three principles, and you add these four principles. You retain crop residues, you use natural fertilizers like compost, you integrate animals, you eliminate synthetic fertilizers and herbicides. And that's great. You can add even more. But then our principle, our theory is that if we add biochar, mycorrhizal fungi inoculants, and bokashi EM food scraps and woody mulch, we will greatly increase even the regen system. And that's what we would love to prove. And in fact, it's kind of the basis of what we need to prove, because our business model is so different from the usual business model of let's make compost and sell it. Instead, what we're trying to sell is a more productive rural property that is more resilient to climate change impacts and is a carbon sink. Potentially farmers could get carbon credits if we could prove that they're growing soil carbon, permanent stable carbon, over a long period in a short period of time, but that would remain there for a long period of time. And the secret to this, kind of like the magic of the magic, is glomalin. And it's a very stable form of carbon made from a special type of fungi. It can't be disturbed. It doesn't like pesticides or fungicides. It doesn't like being tilled up. that's one of the reasons we don't turn our compost. We're trying to grow the mycorrhizal fungal inoculants. So I kind of rushed through that because it was getting late, but questions?